Who is Nate Diaz? And no, stop, don't recite his Wikipedia biography. My question demands a little bit more thought. I want to understand him on a human level as a fighter and also what makes him so damn popular. And while each of these questions offer varying degrees of difficulty, they're all inherently tough. And there's good reason for that. Existential questions such as these are arduous no matter who the subject is. But when the subject is Nate Diaz, things get exponentially more complex and, more importantly, exponentially more interesting. Fans aren't fascinated by his nature because it's easily understood, rather it's despite that. To many, he's a relatable figure navigating his way through this unrelatable occupation that is MMA, and then conversely he's prone to erratic moments where his idiosyncratic point of view baffles that same crowd. But hey, contradictions are what make us human. For me, UFC 241 was the catalyst in turning this question, who is Nate Diaz, from a passing thought to an essential assignment. I mean, in the past I've mulled it over, casually trying to piece things together, usually when he said or done something I found perplexing, but ultimately I always conceded defeat to the idea that it was just Nate being Nate. But everything about his UFC 241 return got my wheels turning. The build up, the fight, the fallout, and of course the BMF belt. Because I think that prize itself can tell us a lot about him. Like his brother Nick, Nate's enigmatic offbeat personality has captivated fans for years, and when you mix that with his unique brand of combat, you've got a truly compelling character. And as you'd expect for close brothers, they share many beliefs, with a major one being their complicated view of the sport that pays their bills. If you observe either brother compete, not having prior knowledge to their mentality, you'd be convinced that they love to fight, but they'd be quick to correct you. In the beginning, their MMA pursuits seem to be a necessity rather than a goal, a means to an end. And it's no secret that Nick has been an open book about the fact that he hates fighting. And Nate once said that it's simply bullshit when others say that they love it. But despite this, Nate, and Nick for that matter, accept the game for what it is in a literal sense. When he's in the cage, the man standing across him is his enemy, and this mindset matches that of his overall view of the sport. Nate habitually calls his brother the best fighter in the game, and loyalty isn't the only reason for that. It plays its part, sure, but I genuinely feel that he believes it. By traditional standards, you know, wins, losses, championships, and credentials, Nick is certainly good, but he isn't the best fighter in the world, and that goes without saying. So when Nate drops it into conversation, it can be a little jarring. But if you look at it through Nate's worldview, the BMF worldview, if you will, you can see why he makes this claim, even if you disagree with it. Instead of traditional standards, he puts more value in metrics like tenure, strength of opposition, fight style, cool factor, overall badassery, and being about that life, for a lack of a better phrase. And no matter where you rate Nick from a traditional sense, he undoubtedly ranks high under that system. But this is exactly where the disconnect between Nate and the UFC takes hold, or at least where it used to take hold, because it's clear that they've had an epiphany on his worth in recent times. But before all that, the disconnect was that they had competing value hierarchies. So it's not that the UFC didn't value what Nate stood for, because much of it is vital to their product, but they didn't value them to the same level relative to more traditional measurements. And thus, in a way, they didn't value Nate at the same price that he felt he was worth. And this is not unlike how many people in the world feel about their own situation. I guarantee that there are plenty of people watching this video now who feel like their boss undervalues their contributions. So it's easy to sympathize with the Stockton native. On his podcast before UFC 241, your favorite comedian slash commentator slash DMT advocate, Joe Rogan, referred to Diaz as the worst promoted superstar in the UFC, and he might be right about that.
Nate Diaz has an army behind him.
Yeah,
They put money down.
He's a huge star. He's one of the least. He's like the worst promoted superstar.
Him and his brother.
Him and his brother.
They could have made
giant
my
stars.
favorite.
But we should also consider the nuances. In my opinion, a large portion of Nate's popularity came from the UFC's apparent lack of confidence in him as a bankable star. And this starkly contrasts him with his biggest rival, Conor McGregor. He was a promotional darling and the UFC knew it. And that's why they went full steam ahead with the McGregor experiment. And while you can't ignore the Irishman's numerous disputes with the promotion, they always worked things out with McGregor getting exactly what he wanted in the end. And this historically wasn't the case with Diaz. And as fans routinely protested the fact that the UFC never got behind their guy like they did with McGregor, and they'd be absolutely right about that. But that doesn't mean that they didn't get behind him at all, because McGregor is a unique case. The UFC have never got behind anybody like they have with McGregor, so that's kind of an unrealistic standard. And love him or hate him, Conor, I mean, In his dual title ascent, he capitalized on every opportunity that he was given, earned or not, and the UFC responded by throwing their marketing machine behind him. In Diaz's case, before the Irishman even debuted in the UFC, he had headlined 5 fight night events, one of which included a title challenge against then lightweight champion Benson Henderson. So he got opportunities, but opportunity and promotion aren't really the same thing. Opportunity capitalized on with success can lead to promotion and vice versa, but just because Diaz was given opportunities and chances doesn't mean that he was marketed effectively. However, when Diaz demands that the UFC market and promote him more, what does that mean exactly? With McGregor, the example he often brings up, they led with what they knew. They ran with traditional marketing methods, they heavily promoted him through adverts, arranged high profile media appearances, the approach that has worked across every industry in the past. And McGregor proved to be a natural play in that role. But if there's one thing that we know for certain, it's that Diaz isn't natural in that role.
What makes Rafael dangerous and why are you better?
I don't know. I think that's enough, man. It's good enough for the day.
Partially because he has no interest in playing it in the first place.
Turned into something of like a white whale when it comes to MMA interviews, you know that?
I don't know what a white whale is.
It means that you don't do many of them.
Yeah.
How come?
It just doesn't necessary to talk all the time.
But in 2014, something pretty funny happened. UFC president Dana White inadvertently promoted Diaz in the best way he possibly could. And it wasn't by running adverts or putting him on morning television. It was very different. Coincidentally, while doing press for UFC Dublin, an event which marked McGregor's first time headlining a UFC card, Dana criticised Diaz's drawing power, claiming he wasn't a, quote, needle mover.
And the unfortunate part is he's not a needle mover. His brother is a needle mover. He's not.
I maybe disagree with you.
Listen, I don't like when I
you
say
said he isn't a needle mover. I think Diaz is a needle. I mean,
he's not, Nate Diaz is not a needle mover. I love Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is actually one of my favorite kids. I always got along with Nate. Nate was always great. Lowest rated Fox show ever.
What about the Tough Finale when he headlined that?
What about it? Lowest rated Fox show ever. His number, he doesn't pull the numbers in.
This came after a number of Diaz headlined events underperformed in White's eyes. And while being publicly skewered by your boss should be a low point in your career, it was actually a watershed moment for Diaz in a peculiar kind of way. He was already this anti-establishment type who was treated unfairly by the, quote, man, and the boss just reaffirmed it. And I'd love to think that this was intentional by Dana White, a stroke of promotional genius in disguise, but I don't think so, even though he is a great promoter. And say what you will about his tactics, I don't like many of them. You can't deny that he's great at what he does. And if you do, he's got the record to prove you wrong. Anyway, if Dana truly believed this to be true, that Diaz wasn't a needle mover, was he right about that in the first place? Did the events underperform? Well, it's difficult to judge. If anybody solely looks at the event on event data and comes to a final conclusion, don't listen. Univariate analysis, which is what this would be, could provide the right answer, but it's more likely to produce misleading results. This is because you need to consider all the factors that could impact an event's success, and there are many, including the sport's overall popularity at the time, not just the popularity of the show's headliners. Anyway, I don't want to dwell too much on these numbers because it doesn't really matter, but for Diaz, Dana's criticism was a good thing. It solidified him as the premier anti-establishment fighter in the UFC, and many fans and media members loved him for it. But despite his growing support, he ended that year, 2014, with a disappointing loss to Rafael dos Anjos. He missed weight and honestly looked disinterested. That Diaz bravado we normally see from him when he's at his best just wasn't there. And the loss compounded with further criticism from Dana, where he said that Nate should, quote, get serious or retire, didn't bode well for Diaz's future. And while he still had a lot of support, if you go back and look at how the media and even some fans were talking about him at the time, that narrative, get serious or retire, was actually reasonably common. And then the Michael Johnson fight happened and Diaz looked spectacular. He fought with that bravado that was missing against Dos Anjos. It wasn't the cleanest win ever, and Johnson certainly had his moments early on, but it was classic Diaz. And then he channeled that Diaz bravado into the microphone when he called out Conor McGregor in one of the most memorable post-fight interviews of all time. And remember, around that time, everyone and their mother was calling out Conor McGregor, but this one felt different. There were no gimmicks, no McNuggets, no leprechaun talk. It wasn't silly, it was pure anger. and Diaz had a lot to be angry about. He was still at odds with his promoter and was reportedly paid $20,000 to show and $20,000 to win for the fight, and it was his 22nd fight in the promotion. It was on Big Fox, and his base salary was significantly less than many of the fighters on the prelims. And sure, he did bank a further $50,000 for the Fight of the Night honors, and I know that many fighters get paid more than their reported pay actually suggests, so let's hope that he did, but come on, that contracted pay is ridiculous. In any case, it's been almost 4 years since that post-fight interview, but the content of it might make more sense now than it did at the time. He said that McGregor was, quote, taking everything I worked for, and back then it was a cool line and the delivery was pure Diaz, but now it brings my mind back to an anecdote he told Brett Okamoto in a recent sit-down interview. There was a time when Diaz was in a position not unlike McGregor's when the Irishman was working his way up the featherweight division. Like McGregor, he was on a hot streak gaining traction and the UFC machine was about to get behind him. But being young and not naturally programmed to that side of the business, the bit that takes place outside the octagon, he didn't realise it, he didn't capitalize, and feels like he missed the boat on it.
So I'm like already 8-0 in the UFC. Dana White's flying me out like, hey, come on, let's play poker and do this and that. And he took me out there. I'm just a kid. He takes me to play poker. I don't know how to play no poker. I'm in Vegas with Dana White and a Ben Davis jockey. Like, what's up? What are we about to do? You know what I'm saying? And so now I realize, like, oh, it was my time. He was like, okay, dude, we're gonna play you. I was too young and I didn't know nothing about none of that.
In contrast, McGregor certainly didn't miss his boat. He pre-boarded that thing. And when the UFC started pumping the accelerator on his push, he embraced it and took the wheel. So now looking back at the post-fight interview, they'd taken everything I worked for, I don't think Nate was necessarily angry at McGregor himself. Rather, he was protesting the system. And in many ways, to Diaz, McGregor represented that system. And it's funny, I remember when Conor was getting some stateside coverage later in his Cage Warriors days, he was being christened by many American people as an Irish Diaz brother. And I get that. They share many traits, yet they're very different personalities. And even though many people can relate to McGregor's humble working class beginnings, and I can relate to him as an Irishman, his meteoric rise wasn't normal and we shouldn't pretend that it was. And once the money started rolling in, his brash Mayweather-like persona developed. He was wearing incredibly expensive clothes, driving incredibly expensive cars, and flying around in his incredibly expensive private jet. On the flip side, when the money started rolling in for Diaz after their pair of fights, there was no huge change, at least not on the surface. He was still wearing the same clothes he always wore, and that fact was even used as an attack by McGregor.
Nate, I just hope he's not up on that stage wearing that stupid black t-shirt he's never out of. The boy has been wearing that same damn t-shirt for the past 20 years or something.
And I know the circumstances are different because McGregor certainly made way more than Diaz in their pair of fights. However, Diaz still did make some life-changing money, way more than he's ever made in his past fights. Yet he's seemingly the same guy. And a lot of people respect that kind of modesty and consistency. And the same can be seen in his competitive mindset as well. I mean, he's certainly wised up to the fact that fighting any schmo, regardless of how beneficial the matchup may or may not be, isn't the smartest business move. But his propensity to fight bad motherfuckers is still there. It's evident in the types of opponents he's both accepted and campaigned for. Before ending his 3-year hiatus away from MMA, he accepted a fight with Dustin Poirier, an absolute badass. But that fight fell through, so later he fought sentient highlight reel Anthony Pettis. And after he won that in his post-fight interview, he called for Jorge Masvidal, the street Jesus himself, an absolute badass as well. So you can see where his mind is at. He wants to fight a certain type of dude. He told Brett Okamoto how he plays this game like it's Street Fighter. Get the two coolest, baddest dudes, put them in a cage and let them fight and then see what happens.
It'd be nice.
I feel like I'm just better and cooler than those guys. What the hell do I want to fight them for? Pettis is cooler than both of them, fight-wise. You know what I'm saying? Remember Street Fighter? I want to see that versus that guy. Like, you know what I'm saying? Or just at school when you just knew two dudes who kick and you were like, I wonder what would happen if them fools fight, you know?
But the opponent in Diaz's mind doesn't have to measure up to the conventional metrics that the UFC deem paramount. They need to measure up to his metrics, the same ones that convince him that his brother is the best fighter in the world. And in Masvidal, Diaz found a perfect challenger, and for several reasons. He obviously fits the mold that Diaz is looking for, but he's also not some schmo either. He's clearly a BMF, so to speak, but he's also transformed into one of the UFC's most talked about stars. And his story, interestingly, sort of follows a similar narrative to Diaz's, although there are some definite differences. Where Diaz's surge in popularity felt like it could have been an eventuality with the right push, Masvidal's felt truly unexpected, Like Diaz, Masvidal was an underground favourite, but when he was fighting in Strikeforce and competing against mid-card UFC talent, there was no strong indication that his star would explode, until he knocked out Darren Till in March of this year. And if you look back, most onlookers felt like their fight seemed like a rebound match for Till in his home country. He was coming off an unsuccessful title challenge to Tyron Woodley, and the UFC gave him Jorge Masvidal, a well-respected veteran, but also a guy on a 2-fight losing streak with very little momentum. But if that was the idea, a rebound fight for Till, Masvidal clearly ruined those plans and went viral twice in the process. First, it was the devastating KO of the Liverpoolian, and second, the now famous 3-piece in a soda that he served to Leon Edwards post-fight. But again, kinda like Diaz, what really made him a star was when he fought and finished a cocky, surgeon, trash-talking rival. In Diaz's case, it was Conor McGregor, but for Masvidal, it was Ben Askren. So you can see where their respective trajectories align, and in a few weeks' time, they're gonna meet. And they won't just meet, no. They're headlining a UFC pay-per-view in the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden. And it's important to remember that UFC pay-per-view main events are usually reserved for their title fights. So much so that a sticking point in Conor McGregor's return was that he was offered a co-main event slot due to no UFC title being involved. Yet for Diaz and Masvidal, they will headline one, with the prize at the end being a belt that Diaz willed into existence. A belt that really isn't the UFC's. It's under his terms. He fights an opponent that he values, and after everything that he's fought for and fought against over the years, that must feel good.
He's a needle mover now.
So if you got to this point of the video, you must have liked it even a little bit, so hit that thumbs up button below, it does really help. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and you can catch all our future videos. And thanks to everyone who liked and subscribed to the last McGregor video. We got a ton of new subscribers from it, which is cool, so hopefully you like this one as well. Cheers.